because mind you, it's 1987. And he was just like, what the hell are we going to do with you? So I was the first female to check into Marine Corps Air Station Fatema, HNHS, as a female for crash crew or recovery. So we had no bunk, no head, no showers for a female.
Hello, this is Tab Bartley, and you are listening to the Oath We Took podcast, the show that tells the Marine Corps story through the Marines that served. I'm joined today by Micaila Britto. She is the reason for this podcast. I know so many amazing Marines who hesitate to tell their stories. Their stories hold so much power and so many life lessons. Oftentimes, though, they go untold. Not every Marine story is the same. What is the same is the oath we all took. Thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure. Thank you. I feel
like
we've known each other for forever.
I agree. And I have been looking forward to your interview so much. And I'm so excited to do it and hear it. And even like in the pre-interview, we were already talking about things where I was like, you experienced what? That's how it was. Like, it's just wild. And right. So I think the first question I always ask is, why did you decide to join the Marine Corps?
So my mom died when I was 8. So I knew that my dad wasn't going to be able to afford to send me to college. So especially with the schools that I wanted to go to, because I wanted to be an architect. And so I talked to my dad, and my dad was like, you got to figure out how you're going to pay for school. So I started talking to all the branches of the military, and they were just like kind of wanting, I went in to see the Army, and they were all set to like hand me everything on a silver platter. My dad is a World War II veteran, grew up during the Depression. So it was, you earn what you get. If somebody's giving you something, it's too good to be true. So that was the mentality that I had the whole time growing up. So again, Army wanted to hand everything to me on a silver platter. Navy, I was just like, if you're going to join the Navy, you need to be on a ship. But at the time, women weren't really on board ships, because I served from 1987 to 1994. So I went in, and I went to go talk to the Air Force recruiter, and it seemed like every time I went in to see him, he wasn't there. So it just so happens that there was a bunch of kids in my homeroom class in high school who were like, you're thinking about joining the military? And I was like, yeah. So of course, one of them, Bartel, comes over and he's like, hey, so yeah, you want to talk to my recruiter? And at first I didn't think anything about it, because I didn't know, like back then we earned our dress blues like on recruiting or whatever. So I was like, yeah, okay. So he sets up an appointment, and I go in and talk to him, and I'm in there, and like literally within 2 hours I was like, yep, this is what I want to do. So I was all set to join the Marine Corps Reserves so it could pay for me to go to school. But at the time I was only 17, so I would have needed my dad's consent anyway. So I tell my dad was like, okay, break a leg. Like no like emotion whatsoever. I go and I take the ASVAB, and I think that I did horrible because I had an 88, thinking, oh, score is 100. I have an 88. I suck. So we get back, because back then you could take the ASVAB after you talk to them about joining.
Okay.
So I was just like, okay. So like I said, I get an 88, get back there, and my recruiter goes, you got the highest score. I was like, what? He's like, out of the office, you have the highest score. I was like, how? And then he explained to me the whole concept of you do better than 88% of everybody who takes the test. I was like, oh, okay. So it's not like out of 100. He's like, no. So I qualified for any and all jobs except for combat arms. So I go up and I talk to MEPS, and MEPS says, we can give you a 6-year guaranteed corporal, um, and you'll get promoted to corporal within 2 years, and you'll get your guaranteed MOS specialty, and you'll can get your first duty station. So I went from being Marine Corps reserves to pay for college to coming back from MEPS, signing a 6-year active duty, going overseas. And I came home and I was like, Dad, so I got this thing that's called Airfield Occupational Specialty. And he goes, okay. He goes, what's it do? And I go, I don't know. And he goes, okay. He goes, are there jobs listed? And I was like, well, yeah, there's flight clearance and base operations. There's air, which is a 7041, and a 7011 is aircraft launch and recovery, and a 7051 is crash fire rescue. I go, I don't know which one I'm going to get. It's whichever one they decide to give me when I get at boot camp. He goes, okay. He goes, just don't quit. So that's how I went from thinking I was gonna have this little bit of extra money with the GI Bill as a reservist to being 6 years active duty, getting ready to go to Okinawa, Japan for my first duty station.
And you're still 17 at that time, right? So you're still in high
Yeah.
school.
Yes.
How was that being a female that's getting ready to go to the Marine Corps in high school? Like, was that normal where you were from, or was it like you were kind of like the only one?
I was the first female my recruiter put in. Like, obviously, like he had put in lots of people, and obviously recruiting station Boston has put in a lot of women, but for RRS, um I was his first female, but there was a female drill recruiter at the we were in RSS and he
Yeah.
was at the RS, so she was at the RS. So um there there was one there, and I went over and I talked to her, and I was like, okay, this is cool. I was like, this is really what I think I want to do. Um, and so I was the only female in the delayed, and I was just like, okay. And my recruiter did not treat me any different than the guys. Like anything the guys did, I had to do. Um, there was no preferential treatment. I got clocked big time with pugil sticks a few times at pulley events, but then I very quickly learned I need to clock them back. So, you know, and out of my graduating class, 17 of us joined the military.
That's pretty
And
high, right? I mean, how large was your
yeah,
class? That seems pretty high to me anyway.
500, no, 17 in the Marines, not in the
Just in the Marine
military,
Corps.
in the
Oh,
Marine Corps.
wow.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Hmm.
Wow. Where are you from
Yeah.
again? What's your hometown?
Taunton, Massachusetts. So I'm about 25 miles south of Boston, about
Yeah.
20 miles east of Providence.
That
Yeah.
seems that seems like a lot to me. I don't know.
It,
Maybe it's not, but it seems like a lot. And especially they weren't actively recruiting for females back then.
right.
It was just like
Yeah.
if you came in, then great. Like, like cool, because it was still that way when I joined in 2010,
And
2009.
there's totally different recruiting regulations. Like for a female, you had to have a 51 in order to join when I came in. And I came in pre-Gulf War, so we were peacetime.
That is so, and that kind of leads us into the conversation of like the beginning of this. And I absolutely love interviewing female Marines. And I don't say that lightly. I was saying because like female Marines, I
Right.
mean, we're Marines
Yep.
first and foremost, but
Right.
it feels like we have gone through a lot more change in a short amount of time than like,
Yep.
I've interviewed a ton of men at all different phases and times in the Marine Corps. And it just seems like those of us who are female, we've experienced a lot of change in a shorter amount of time. Like one of the things you said in boot camp, you guys didn't even have name tags.
No, well, nobody did. So I have one even better for you. I joined during FY 87. I went to boot camp in September. Um, and then obviously the new FY 88 started. I was still 17 all through boot camp. Like literally the entire time through boot camp, I went September 27th, graduated December 22nd. I was still 17 years old. I came home, and 1 week later on December 29th, I turned 18. The morning of my 18th birthday, my dad took me to City Hall so I could register to vote because I already knew that I was going to Okinawa, Japan. And 1988 was the presidential election. And I was so excited that I
You
was
got
going to
to
be able
vote in
to
it.
vote.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how cool that you did like a mail-in ballot from Japan,
Right.
right? I
Yeah.
mean, that's extra cool to me. So what else was boot camp like for you? Was it kind of like what you expected? You said you did like get to meet a female Marine beforehand, so you talked to somebody, but how was that experience of boot camp?
So I think for me, for boot camp, because like I got treated like one of the guys, and because they were like, well, we don't know what girls go through. So I was prepared for the utter and complete worst experience ever. Um, and and I'm not saying that boot camp wasn't horrific because we all know that it was, but it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be because like I said, I was just so mentally prepared for the absolute worst. Um, so we did a 1.5 mile run. We did the flexed arm hang and we did sit-ups. Um, I did not do MCT. Um, but like we went to the field and we did not have the crucible. So for me, I feel like I had a walk in the park for boot camp compared to what people do now. Um, and yeah, at the same time, like I was telling you, FY 87 was when they dropped the W from in front of your social security number. So when I was going to my MOS school, there was no W in front of my name, in front of my social. So of course, when I show up, believe it or not, there were 5 of us who show up for our class, and they were like, "Whoa," because I went to school on a Navy base at Lakehurst, New Jersey, so there was no place for us because you just had the men's wing in the Navy barracks, so we had to stay in the female Navy wing. But it was really funny because there's a big giant sign that says "No Marines on the quarterdeck." Yet it's like, how do you get in and out to get to the female wing without going across the quarterdeck? So like the 5 of us came up with some ingenious ways, and of course we got in trouble at one point. We got in really big trouble because we cut the fire wire on the emergency door so that we could go in and out the door without setting the alarm off. Climbed in and out windows, and then one day our first sergeant for schools caught us, and he's like, "What the hell are you guys doing?" And we're like, "For sergeant, it says no Marines on the quarterdeck." And he goes, "What?" Because he'd never gone in and out the front door. They'd always gone in the side doors where the Marine wing was, never came through the front door of the barracks. So he goes over there and and they went ballistic. He went ballistic on the petty officer who was on the watch and stuff, wanting to know why they were making us climb in and out windows. And next thing you know, like the lift of no Marines on the quarterdeck was lifted. But yeah, they totally forgot about the fact that duh, you have women who are Marines who are living in this barracks now. But so yeah, we made Lakehurst, New Jersey living hell because they were like, what are we gonna do with you guys?
And
And
so,
then it
and what
it was, but for us, we were just like, okay, improvise, adapt, and overcome, because they said that
I
we
was
can't do
about to
this, so
say,
we're gonna figure it out.
no problem, got this. Oh gosh, that is so funny. And I love military shenanigans. I think like things like that are just like, oh, those are the stories you tell years later, right? And like you remember so fondly. So what MOS did you end up getting?
My primary MOS was 7011 aircraft launch and recovery. So basically, you know how when a jet lands on an aircraft carrier and it catches that cable? So that was my job on a fixed airfield. The cable, maintaining the engines that run the cable. So it's called M21 arresting gear, which is the normal everyday arresting gear. And then you have E28 gear, which is the emergency gear. Um, and then all the airfield lighting. And then like out at 29 Palms or at FOB at forward operating bases, you have the VTOLs, the vertical short landing and takeoff pads made out of AM2 matting. So that was our job. So we could make an expeditionary airfield anywhere and support whoever.
Okay, that's
So,
really cool.
and we worked side by side with crash fire rescue. So our OIC was a combination of either aircraft launch and recovery or crash fire rescue. And we shared the crash barn. So when I got to Okinawa, obviously there are a couple of the guys who are in the graduating class ahead of me, so they all knew who I was. So we get there and they bring a crew truck to pick you up. So in case of emergency, you have to be able to respond. So the two guys knew who I was. Now remember, there used to be a W in front of women's social security numbers. So get there and White and Wells walk in with Corporal Mossage. Corporal Mossage walks right past me. Wells and White stop and they're talking to me. Mind you, I was Lance Corporal Britto because I was guaranteed contract and I picked up Lance Corporal at MOS school. Wells walks right by, and then he walks over. He's talking to S1, and the two guys are standing there talking to me. All of a sudden, Mossage turns around and starts yelling and screaming at them about talking to the split. That's exactly what he called me, was a split. Um, and then they're both like, but uh, and before they could say it, the staff sergeant in S1 was like, "Oh, that's Lance Corporal Brito," and he turned around and he was like, "That's a blah 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 girl." Yep, yep, I am. And I was in Charlie's, so because I was checking in, so I was in my skirt. Yeah, so kind of obvious that I was a girl. But so we get over to the crash crew barn. My gunny was this crusty gunny from Vietnam, because mind you, it's 1987. And he was just like, what the hell are we going to do with you? So I was the first female to check into Marine Corps Air Station Fatema, HNHS, as a female for crash crew or recovery. So we had no bunk, no head, no showers for a female.
The Oath We Took podcast, hosted by Marine Corps veteran Tab Bartley, tells the Marine Corps story through the Marines who served. While every story is unique, the common bond is the oath they all took. Tune in Mondays at 5 p.m. Eastern on Wreaths Across America Radio to catch these engaging conversations. Tab is also supporting the Military Women's Memorial through her Wreaths Across America sponsorship page. For every veteran's wreath you sponsor at wreathsacrossamerica.org/The Oath We Took, $5 will go directly to the Military Women's Memorial, the leading memorial and education center honoring the commitment, contributions, and experiences of servicewomen. Once again, to donate, go to wreathsacrossamerica.org/The Oath We Took.
Which I think is what I get from that story, besides the negative, but the two, essentially your peers and how they weren't fazed by it.
Right.
And I think that just speaks so much again for like the change and like what females in the Marine Corps went through. But then you had all of these peers who they're fine with it, right? Like they interacted with you at the schoolhouse. Maybe there was trepidation then or whatever thought.
But Tab, I was the class leader at the schoolhouse because I was a Lance Corporal.
Yeah. So like, it's just wild to me. And I think it speaks again on like, we talk often in the Marine Corps, how it's like really senior leadership and those, leaders who create the culture. And if they don't change
won't happen.
Change won't happen. But then you have
or
these
it won't
peers
happen the way it's supposed to.
Or as fast and all of that. Because obviously here are your peers and they're just like, yeah, this is the new Marine. Yep. Here she is. Like, yeah, not a, and that had to be like, you're also in a new country and you don't know anybody. So kind of how was that? Because I mean, from like your personality and I think from how you explained your dad and even how you like just decided to join the Marine Corps, I don't think that you had like confidence issues or anything of that nature, but I can imagine that being in that foreign of a situation, how that may like it, and I don't want to put words into your mouth, but was that maybe like a moment of like, dang, I gotta like, this is what I'm gonna deal with. This is what it's gonna be.
Well, so I have a funny story for you. Growing up, I was the only little girl in the neighborhood for the longest time. So I used to always just play with the boys. And the house behind us, this is before my mom died. So this is when we were living in Attleboro. And the house behind us had two boys who are a little bit older than me. And then, of course, all the boys in the neighborhood. But so we shared the backyard. And then they have two younger sisters. So they were even younger than me. So it was, I could either play with the babies or I could play with the boys. So 9 times out of 10, I played with the boys. I came home with a butt full of gravel one time because the boys were sliding into second base. So I wanted to learn to slide into second base like the boys did, other than I was wearing shorts and they were wearing baseball pants. So I came home with a butt full of gravel and had to have it picked out with tweezers and everything. And yeah, so lesson learned. First thing my dad said when he came home from work was, "Did you cry?" I was like, "Not till I got home." He said, "Good girl." So I didn't cry in front of the boys, but when I got home, boy, did I cry because it hurt like a mofo. But at the same time, I took 14 years of dance growing up. So it's like, even though I was a tomboy, I was a girly girl to an extent.
Yeah.
I weighed, literally when I went to boot camp, I was a $105 soaking wet. And I cut my hair so I was under my minimum. So they had to do a weight waiver for me because I cut my hair. Because my hair was like down my back. So I made the minimum at that point. And then I cut my hair. And my recruiter was like livid because now all of a sudden we had to do a weight waiver.
Yeah.
And then when I got to boot camp, I was getting wicked bad headaches from putting it up so much. So they said that I could go to the hair salon so they could teach me a different way to put my hair up. I came back and it was like an inch long because I had it completely cut off.
Yeah.
And again, I got yelled at and screamed at by the drill instructors because I was then told boot camp is the only time that I have to worry about having my hair up and looking good 24/7, because when you get out into the fleet, you're not a, yes, you're a Marine 24/7, but you're not in uniform 24/7. My response was, it's just hair. Well, again, I didn't realize that I now was like even less under the minimum weight for my height. So I was a beanpole. Same thing over there in Okinawa. The guys, same, like, taught, lack of a better term, hazing. They made me go do everything that they would make any of the new guys do. I was so excited when I was no longer the FNG, and they would make somebody else do it. But like at one point, they made me go grease the deck pennant with graphite grease. So the deck pennant is about yay big around, but it's 12 wires wrapped around each other, and then it's 7 wires wrapped. So it's like this great big huge cable that catches a jet coming in at 150 knots. They made me do it by myself, so it would take me forever to do it, but I refused to not do it. So yeah, I mean, they made me do things, but I didn't know better. I was 18, didn't know better, just doing my job.
And how was the rest of the experience at Okinawa? And
Um,
living overseas and getting to experience another culture and just like a whole, I mean, you're like you said, you're 18, you were 17 in boot camp. I just like I went in a little older, so like the beauty of like I think being that young and like being able to intake all of that just seems like such a impactful experience.
it was absolutely beautiful, and that's where I got I mean, I had the photography bug already, but being the only female in crash crew recovery, I stuck out like a sore thumb. um so we would go do aircraft checkouts or go like talk to the new UDP units, unit deployments that were coming in, so the 6-month hump guys. And so talk with them, and so I would like start talking to all the helicopter guys. Next thing I know, they'd be like, oh, you want to go flying? So I used to be able to go when we weren't working, because we did 24 on 24 off, 48 on 48 off. When we weren't working, I was flying. Like I was going up in Hueys and in CH-46s and CH-53s, and get to go to like foreign countries with the base CO because he flew C-12s and T-39s. Again, stupid naive, not knowing that this is not how it is for the rest of the Marine Corps. But it was so beautiful, and being able to be up there in the helicopters. And um I'll never forget the first time I went up and they wanted to do auto rotations, because where they like stop the motors and the helicopter drops,
Woo!
and then they restart it. It's for training purposes. But the whole thing is they thought that I would like freak out or get sick. Next thing you know, I have like the door gunner's belt hung over me, and I'm like hanging out the gunner's door, and I'm like, what? And I'm like, you are not normal. And I'm like, this is great. So just being exposed to all those things. And then um 29 Palms was my second duty station.
Mm-hmm.
So go from the beauty of a tropical island to the middle of the Mojave Desert. But you know something? it's just as beautiful there. You have Joshua Tree National Monument, you have Big Bear Mountain, you can go down to the ocean, you can go to Vegas and Laughlin and go to Lake Havasu. So there was always something to do. And you know how Marines are. We'll find a way to have fun doing anything. And yet my MOS mates, we call them hookers because we tail hook. So we're all hookers. So we're hookers for life. And um, some of my best friends to this day are hookers who we've been friends 35 years later. And I can pick up the phone and call them and ask them a question, or they've done the same thing with me. I was medically retired. And, you know, for me, I thought that the Marine Corps was going to be my life. And then all of a sudden, wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. I'm like on my way home with a retired ID card as a corporal. And I was just like, what do I do? I didn't want to move home to Massachusetts because I had just been in either a tropical island or the middle of the Mojave
Right?
Desert for almost 7 years. Yeah, not coming home to snow. So I knew 5 people who were stationed at NAS Belle Chase, Louisiana. So I packed my trash and moved to New Orleans. And I lived down there for about 18 months. And then I learned about VRNE, which at that time was voc rehab, and went to school on LSU's camp. Like I literally set foot on LSU's campus during a semester break and went, yep, this is where I want to go to school.
Oh.
And registered for school and started school like 3 weeks later. And started school down there. And I lived in Louisiana for a good 7 years. And then in 2002, I came home to take care of my dad. But I had a health issue while I was in school, so I at LSU, so I dropped out. I was majoring in graphic design and minoring in photography, but my photography professor at LSU kept telling me to change my major, and I was like, nah, I won't ever use photography. So I moved home to Massachusetts, and I have to brag on the Commonwealth. In the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, dating back to 1862, there's this law. It's called Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 115, where it mandates that every community has a veteran service officer who takes care of our veterans, their spouses, and their orphans, because you got to remember it was during the Civil War.
Yeah.
So this law has been mandated for that long.
Yeah.
You know?
Which is not normal because
No,
there's
so
that's
no
not
other
normal.
State,
Yeah.
no other state in the union. So when my dad told me, oh, you have to go take your DD 214 down to City Hall and see the veterans officer. So I go down there, and that's where it was traumatic. Like, yeah, I got all the crap while I was in the Marine Corps, but to walk into a veterans office here in 2002 and be told, what do you want, little girl? Or same thing with the VA. When I first got out, there was no women's health clinic. There was no like women's health primary care. When I went for my first comp and pen exam, there were still the pull curtains between hospital beds, so it was like a giant squad bay type thing with the beds. And I went in for a GYN exam, so here I am for a GYN exam, and I have this little old man in the bed next to me complaining about his hemorrhoids that are the size of a grape. And I'm like, I was more traumatized going into the VA than I was in the Marine Corps. With all the crap that I went through, good, bad, indifferent, my experience walking into the VA was worse than that. Getting like sitting in the waiting room for hours upon hours and them just like looking over me, not thinking that I was the veteran, thinking I was there as somebody's child or grandchild. Um, like there was this one day I was like literally there for like 4 hours. Like my appointment was supposed to be at 8 o'clock in the morning. It's lunchtime and they're like, little girl, what are you doing here? I was like, I have an appointment. And they're like, who are you? And when I said my name, they were like, oh, we called your name. I was like, no, you didn't. Yeah, Mr. Brito, Mr. Brito. I'm sorry. I'm very much Portuguese, Cape Verdean. There are a ton of Britos. So unless you're going to call somebody's first name, but then even then, if you call John, you're probably going to get like 5 people.
Yeah.
So I never answered, but it goes all the way back to that and the not having the acknowledgement of who you are and what you did. And, you know, being treated like that motivated me to, I knew I needed to find a job after my dad passed away. And I was like, I really want to help veterans because if I had such a hard time navigating the system, what's it like for them? Like, what's it like now? I'm struggling to have my VA claim. I'm struggling with college. So I went to work for Raytheon because, you know, Raytheon takes care of the warfighter. And while I was there for Raytheon, I was like, I like my job, but I don't feel like I was doing what I really needed to do. So then I went to work for big VA, for VA Boston Healthcare System. And yet even that, because I was just program support, I was like, yeah, this isn't really what I wanted to do. And just so happens I had to go in for again to see the veteran service officer to get a copy of my DD 214 because I had decided to go back to school to finish off my degree because I was like that close, so why not finish it?
Mm-hmm.
um and he said something and I was just like, ah. he was he goes, what, do you think you can do better? And don't you know, my very next job that I got was a veteran service officer, not in my hometown, but in the town next to it. So, like, that was my motivation to become a veterans advocate, you know. And I became a VSO for 3 different communities here in the Commonwealth while going to school to finish off my degree. And then last year, I left being a VSO, and in the fall semester, I wanted to finish my degree, but as a studio arts major, you know, you can't take very many classes at night. So I just had 4 classes left. So I decided to go to school full time. Uh, and I graduated in the fall and I with my degree in photography. And yep. So it was pretty amazing. But you know, this whole time as a veteran service officer, my service still got overlooked at times. There were so many times where I had been a keynote speaker or I had been at an event and they wanted to acknowledge the veterans. And after the fact, people were coming up and thanking all the guys and then walking straight past me. And I took out and I did, it's called the Adrian Tinsley Project. It's an undergraduate research grant. And I did a photography project on women veterans, and it's called Melting Back into Society. And so I was able to photograph 10 women and I documented their lives and their stories through photos. And I actually made a book just so that I would have something at symposium. And I had like 16 by 20 prints of these 10 women, 9 other people, and myself. I did my own self portraits. So that project actually took on a life of its own, and I was able to present it at Posters on the Hill through down in Washington, D.C. So I was able to show it to our federal stakeholders and got tons of comments and questions and concerns from people wanting to know what they could do different for women. It's like, just treat us like you treat any veteran.
See, that's the
Um,
crazy thing, I think, to me, is it is because I had a similar experience where my gender did not matter as much in the Marine Corps. I really didn't
right,
have a ton of like what I would call negative experiences where they're like things, sure, great, but nothing like when I got out, where it was all of a sudden
right.
my gender mattered so much in a very like, yeah, type of
Yes,
way. And, you know, you look at it, it's like there's no studies, medical studies done on women. I mean, you look at the anatomy of the uterus and all of that in a medical book, and it's completely inaccurate.
right.
All the only expectation is that it is the same.
Yeah,
If it was the same, then we wouldn't have all of these issues. If the care was the same, if the, you know, reactions and the interactions and the that type of stuff, if it was the same, then it wouldn't be this like it I think that's what a lot of people miss. So I'm glad you brought that up, and I'm also really glad you brought the photos up because I was watching you as you were like publishing the photos, and they were absolutely breathtaking and just like
thank you.
absolutely
So,
beautiful.
so with that being said, it took on a life of its own. And in the fall, I needed a 400 level class. So I teamed up with one of the sculptor professors and made them into shadow boxes. So I ended up photographing 6 more women. And so I ended up making 20 shadow boxes. So it's the image, and then a piece of vellum is their story. And then it's being suspended by 1/8 inch frame spacer. And then on the front of the shadow box with my Cricut, I cut vinyl, holographic vinyl. So for the shadow boxes, there's so much more meaning behind it. So yeah, you have your image, you have that photo, and then that piece of vellum is tissue paper and it's very, very thin, and it's holding your whole entire story together. I represent that as our skin, because it's there, it's fine, it's very, but you can cut yourself and it'll tear and it'll bleed, but you can mend it. So it's that little paper thin thing that's holding your story together, but that's not all that's you. And then the name and the emblem that I put on the front of it is holographic, because we have so many different things and you're bouncing different life and different situations off of you, that you always have to be reflective of what's going on. So that's why I use those different things to represent. And in January, I had a reception at school. The dean of the humanities college actually hung my 20 um, shadow boxes in her area of the humanities. And so I had a reception, and the executive office of veteran services here for the Commonwealth, the deputy secretary, she saw them and was like, what can we do to highlight this for Women's History Month? And I was like, I don't know. So we had this whole conversation about it. And she was like, do you think you could photograph a few more people? And I was like, okay. So this is in February, mind you. Women's History Month is March.
March.
So all of a sudden, I'm like, okay, I photographed 16 more women in like a 3-week time period. And what I did was, not realizing how we would end up showing the story, but we ended up putting them on banners. So there's 6-foot banners, and there's two people per banner, because I didn't know I was limited to 20 banners. So we ended up putting two people per banner. There's one banner that it's me on the top, and then the bottom picture is a picture of me and my service dog. So I have two pictures. But I photographed a woman who is boots on the ground in Vietnam, was there at the hospital the day that Sharon Lane was killed. If it had been a matter of a few hours difference, it could have been Martha who was killed instead of Sharon, because they shared for floor four wards A and B. They they were flip flopped. Um, all the way up to, I photographed a woman who was 8 months pregnant, who was an Army reservist, who was a psychiatric nurse, who has since converted and is now a logistics officer. So I have the whole gamut in there. But one set, well, three women that I photographed. One, she started out as a private airman in the Air Force and is now the Assistant Adjutant General for the Massachusetts Air National Guard. Lisa Hasey, she's a brigadier general. Her husband, Dan, is a retired E9 in the Air Force. I don't know their ranks, senior chief or something like that. And so when they met, obviously they were both enlisted. They have two daughters who are airmen in the Air National Guard. Lisa is actually a public affairs by MOS, and their daughter Julia is a public affairs, and she graduated from Suffolk University. No, I forget, one of the colleges up in Boston, but she's photographer. And then their other daughter, Laura Kate, is a model and is a personnel clerk in the Air National Guard. So I have the picture of the three of them for their individual photos. They're all in uniform. And then I have a group picture of the three of them in civilian clothes. But yeah, and each woman, I told a little story about it, and the Executive Office of Veteran Services actually highlighted it and has it posted on their website. And everything is still called Melting Back into Society. But yeah, people seeing these things and realizing that they're like, so where did you get this idea? And I was like, from the way I was treated. And people just look at me and they're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, yeah, because women come home and we can be standing here in full decked out everything Marine Corps. Oh, thank your husband for his service. It's like, get away from me before I throat punch you.
What do you hope that your story, like somebody can learn from your story or experience from your story, or even just remember from your story and your experience?
It doesn't matter what I look like. It doesn't matter. You might think that I'm this timid young woman who would never, like, all unassuming. Don't forget, every Marine is a rifleman, and I am an expert rifle. So that's all I have to say.
Well, I always I don't know where the time went, but we're having to do the last few questions. But before the last question, I just want to make sure, is there anything we haven't talked about that you want to talk about?
If you're a Marine, or if you're a Fleet, Navy, FMF corpsman, chaplain, Women Marines Association, phenomenal organization that tells a story of women Marines dating back to Oprah Mae Johnson, Marine Corps League. Make sure that you're part of these veterans organizations. It's not our grandfather and great grandfather's organizations anymore. It needs us. It needs the younger folks, because if we want to continue to help the generations to come behind us, we need to be able to continue to support them. I love the Iraqi and Afghani war veteran organization. They're doing a phenomenal job. They're the first veterans organization to be able to have a monument built on the mall while the war was still going on, which is phenomenal because I think you're supposed to, like, 20 years or something like that from the conclusion. And, Michael Rodriguez is a phenomenal leader and organizer of that. And, just being able to continue to believe in what each other does and continue to love and support our fellow veterans. Yes, not every veteran is a combat veteran, but every veteran has their own story. And we have to be mindful of that. Everybody has their own trauma. I'm not a combat veteran. Yes, I did serve during Desert Shield, Desert Storm. But some of the stuff that we saw as aircraft launch recovery or side by side with crash fire rescue was just as horrific, if not more so, than what somebody might see in combat. So be mindful that everybody has their own story and treat each other the way that you want to be treated.
And with that, I'm going to ask the last question, which is, if you had to take the oath again, would you?
In a half a heartbeat, without a shadow of a doubt, good, bad, indifferent. I bleed red, and I worship the ground to Saint Mattis, because chaos is everything. And I can actually say that I knew him when he was a lieutenant colonel as the CO of 17 at Trinidad Palms. And John Kelly and Joe Dumford, they're both Boston boys. So I've known them since before I was in the Marine Corps. We met them at a delayed entry program. All the connections that you have, like I told you in our pre-interview, whenever I meet a Marine, I instantly feel like you're my brother or my sister, and I will protect you. Even if I can't stand you, I'll still protect you. I might want to frag you myself, but hey, I'm still going to help and take care of you, because we signed that dotted line that says that we are willing to pay our lives up to an oath of office to have up to and including our lives. And that's what's the most important thing, that people don't understand, that freedom isn't free, but the military will pay for most of it for you.
This is the Oath We Took podcast, and you just heard a piece of Micaila's story. You now know one more Marine and one more piece of Marine Corps history. Her sacrifices matter. Her stories matter. Not every Marine story is the same. We didn't all join the military for the same reason. What is the same is the oath we all took. An oath that easily could have ended in death, and for some, it did. So listeners, instead of asking you to thank a Marine for their service, I am going to challenge you to continue to listen to their stories instead.